Welcome back to the channel, family, and another broadcast. I'm really pleased to be joined once more by Anthony.
Yes, good morning, everybody. My name's Anthony. I'm a grateful recovered addict, zooming in from Bristol today with my friend Paul.
Great to hear you as always, my brother. Thanks for coming along. We're going to be discussing tradition 4 today. So if you're new to recovery, if you're struggling with drug addiction, please check out the other broadcasts on this channel. There's over 40 now. There's one on each of the 12 steps. Indeed, there's 2 on step 1 and 2 on step 2. There's a podcast that's an introduction to CA, the program Steps and Fellowship. There's about 8 personal stories, and there's one on the history and growth of Cocaine Anonymous, an entire psychic change, the spiritual malady, and the ABCs of addiction. So please check those out. Also, later on in the broadcast, I'll be putting up information about how to get yourself to meetings online and face-to-face. Miracles happen in these rooms, so please check out those other broadcasts, get involved. If you want to reach out in the conversation below this broadcast, whether it's on YouTube or Skype or in therooms.com or WhatsApp, please do. There's a lot of help. You know, we're a society of men and women that meet regularly to help each other stay clean, and we try to carry a message of hope, faith and courage, and our promise is freedom, that an addict, any addict, can quit using, lose the desire to use, and find that new way to live. So without further ado, Anthony, let's get our text up, or one of our texts, if we can find it. There it is. So tradition 4, let me just see where we are here. Correct wording. There it is. Each group should be autonomous, except in matters affecting other groups or CA as a whole. So as usual, we've got one of our lovely graphics. Do you think it'd be wise, Anthony, for me just quickly recap just the wording of the first 3 prior to that?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, recap. Yeah.
Why don't we alternate? Do you want to do the first one and I'll do the second one? Or
Okay. Yeah. Okay. The first tradition: our common welfare should come first. Personal recovery depends upon CA unity.
Beautiful. The second tradition: for our group purpose, there is but one ultimate authority, a loving God as he may express himself in our group conscience. Our leaders are but trusted servants. They do not govern.
The third tradition is the only requirement for membership, CA membership, is the desire to stop using or drinking.
The fourth tradition: each group should be autonomous, except in matters affecting other groups or CA as a whole. So this brings us to today's reading, 4 paragraphs. We could do 2 each, but just a quick mention about I like the cartoons. When I was a child, I used to like cartoons, but I quite like to see them. They're helpful to communicate simple truths, aren't they? So it says there, wherever 2 or more are gathered together to practice AA principles, it says an AA group if they say it is. That's a very beautiful, simple thing, Anthony, isn't it? And I can remember when we started a 12-step meeting, goodness me, 13, 15 years ago in this town, and we simply got some literature, some key chips, tea, coffee, biscuits, rented a room, distributed knowledge of the meeting, registered it with the people that produced the where to find, so people could find us, put it online, and boom, we immediately had a meeting in place. And anyone can do that, can't they, Anthony?
Yes, they can. Yeah, that's right. That's right. I like what it says there. There are all kinds of groups, little groups, and you are a member if you say so, and big groups and offbeat groups, and then it just gives a collective of people there. Look, you join the in crowd when you join AA, CA, or NA. You know, we're not anonymous. We're proud.
Yeah, quite, yes. Now, which 2 do you want to do?
Go on, you start us off. I'll do the last 2.
All right. A member who does any amount of traveling finds the AA spirit much the same everywhere. But apart from this inward kinship, there are vast differences among groups. Here, the traveller finds 3 members discussing the steps in somebody's living room. Over there, 300 listening to speakers in a church auditorium. In one part of the US, respectful silence greets the speaker, who begins, "My name is Anne, and I'm an alcoholic. In another, everybody happily shouts, "Hi, Anne." And in many other places, she may introduce herself with her full name. At a 1-hour meeting or a 90-minute meeting. In each neighbourhood in every part of the world reached by AACA or NA, the local group is free to work out its own customs. As always, freedom brings responsibility because each group is autonomous. It's up to each group to avoid any action that might harm AA, and there have been such actions, or this tradition would be unnecessary. Implicit throughout AA's traditions, Bill W. wrote, is the confession that our fellowship has its sins. We admit that we have character defects as a society, and these defects threaten us continually.
Blown up into multiple size, the big ego may inspire one group to take over all the public information work for its area without consulting any of the other local groups. Once the group has decided, we have all the answers, the lid's off. The group may then decide that, let's say, the 11th tradition is our outdated technicality. This is a competitive age. We're going to come right out and give AA some good vigorous promoting. To the general public, this one conspicuous group is AA. Its antics reflect not only on the ignored neighbouring groups, but also on the entire fellowship. In a way, the 4th tradition is like the 4th step. It suggests that the AA group should take honest inventory of itself, asking about each of its independently planned actions. Would this break any tradition? Like an individual member who chooses to make the steps his or her guide towards happy sobriety, the wise group recognises that the traditions are not hindering technicalities. They are approved guides towards the chief objective of all AA groups.
You know, I'm just wondering whether we should take a minute or two just to glance at this before we move on to our next text. You know, it's a phenomenal piece of writing.
Sounds like a good idea to me, Paul.
Right. I mean, my initial thoughts on these 4 paragraphs, Anthony, are, you know, I think that the variety is beautiful. You know, that you can get, you know, respectful sounds of people very loudly greeting each other. There's one CA meeting I occasionally pop to, and while someone's doing a reading, other people are shouting out bits of the reading while they're reading. You know, and it's quite fun. It's all done in a good spirit, you know, whereas other meetings are very orderly, aren't they? You know, and the more serious side, which I'm sure we'll discuss further, is, you know, that we've got to be compos mentis about how, if any, effect we have on other groups or CA as a whole. And I suppose that's the important point here. You know, it's the declaration of liberty and autonomy and responsibility, and yet a sense of accountability to God and to others. So I think it's like a note of caution. Bear in mind there's a bigger picture. That's what I think.
Yeah, my thoughts on this text is that, you know, how it actually starts, you know, giving the examples, because it's a singleness of purpose, and the primary purpose this message has to be carried. But the thing is, we don't want to be bringing, as a group, bringing AA, NA or CA or whatever type of A as a whole into disrepute. You know, we don't want to bring any shame on them. So the autonomy of the group is, and it, you know, I think it was open to interpretation of, you know, we are allowed to be wrong. And but we have to learn by that mistake. It says, as always, freedom brings responsibility, because each group is autonomous. It's up to each group to avoid any action that might harm AA. And there have been such actions. On this tradition, would be necessarily implicit throughout the AA traditions. Bill W. wrote, is the confession that our fellowship has its sins. because, you know, everybody's a sinner. All have sinned and fallen short to the glory of God. And we admit that we have character defects as our society, as we know. And I share it quite frequently. I believe that I was born with a character defects and threatens us continually. But I like this bit. It says, blown up into multiple sizes, the big ego may inspire one group to take over all the public information work in its area. So we have to be careful, you know, around this ego, you know, because these steps, I mean, these traditions, were put in place. The steps deflate the ego, but the traditions were put in place to keep the ego right-sized as well. And it says, once this group has decided, we all have answers, the lid's off. The group may then decide, and let's say the 11th tradition is outdated technicality. So this is the competitive age. We're going to come right out and give AA some good, vigorous promoting. To the general public, this one conspicuous group is AA. Its antics reflect not only the ignored neighbouring groups, but the entire fellowship. So it's about making sure that we do it with the appropriate approaches and making sure that we don't bring the whole fellowship into, you know, disrepute. But it's a great guideline, and in a way, the 4th edition is like the 4th step. So it's about the group taking the inventory around how they are conducting themselves as a group. You know, do you know what I mean, Paul? And I'll pass that back over to you, and then we will continue.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the bigger picture, isn't it? I mean, you know, when we launched this channel, you know, we try to be considerate of traditions and anonymity, you know, and for anyone that's new to the traditions, we, you know, particularly in the last year, we've had a lot of people that come along to 12-step meetings that are completely new to both meetings, steps, you know, and particularly the traditions, you know. And so for anyone that's new, welcome. You know, each 12-step group is fully autonomous, fully self-supporting. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop using. There's only one supreme authority, that's the loving God, who expresses himself for our group conscience, and each group has but one primary purpose: to carry its message to the addict alcoholic who is still suffering. So there's no platforms. That's one of these other dodgy words that's come around the last year or two. There's no platforms in 12-step recovery. There's just groups. There's no top dogs or main men or women, just members. We've got to remember this is 12-step recovery, isn't it, Anthony? And, you know, there's just groups and members, right? And we try to practice these principles in our affairs, and I quite like how it mentioned an inventory. You know, it's quite important for groups to take inventory. Are they still carrying the message? Are they still fully autonomous, self-supporting, welcoming to everybody? You know, are they still under a loving God? You know, these kinds of things. That are they looking out? I mean, another great concern, Anthony, and I'll be quiet now as I'll perhaps invite you to read the first page if you wish, is, you know, the questions of affiliation was mentioned at the end of that reading we've just done. And in the modern era, I mean, here we are on Zoom, whether you and I like it or not. CA is now connected with Zoom. You know, online recovery now in CANA or AA is mostly done on a commercial business platform. So whether we like it or not, by very nature of doing this recording, we are connecting our name with Zoom. You know, and in the same way, when we proliferate these discourses, whether it's on YouTube, Skype, in the rooms, WhatsApp, again, there is a degree of affiliation. That's the reality of it. You know, but we also have to balance out public information and carrying the message. You know, in a world where people are withering and dying of a deathly, insidious illness as we speak, who don't even know we're here. So.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you, Paul. And, you know, when we look at it, the common welfare, you know, tradition 1, trusted servants, you know, they do not govern. 2, the only requirement for membership is a desire, and 4, you know, the autonomy. And you know, when we start looking at this stuff as a whole, our primary purpose is we can't actually mix materialism with spirituality, and that's what this was all about, really. But giving the group the autonomy, we're going to read it now. I'll start us off. Autonomy is a $10 word, but in relation to us, it means very simply that every AA group can manage its affairs exactly as it pleases, except when AA, NA or CA as a whole is threatened. Comes now the same question raised in Tradition 1. Isn't such a liberty foolishly dangerous? Over the years, every conceivable deviation from our 12 steps and traditions has been tried. That was sure to be, since we are so largely a band of ego-driven individualists, children of chaos. We have definitely played with every brand of fire, only to emerge unharmed, and we think wiser. These deviations created a vast process of trial and error, which under the grace of God has brought us to where we stand today. When AA's traditions were first published in 1946, we had become sure that the AA group could stand almost any amount of battering. We saw that the group, exactly like the individual, must eventually conform to whatever tested principles would guarantee survival. We had discovered that there was perfect safety in the process of trial and error. So confident of this had we become that the original statement of AA's tradition carried the significant sentence: any 2 or 3 alcoholics gathered together for sobriety may call themselves an AA group, provided that as a group they have no other affiliation. This meant, of course, that we have been given the courage to declare each AA group an individual entity, strictly reliant on its own conscience as a guide to action. In charting these enormous expanses of freedom, we found it necessary to post only 2 storm signals. A group ought not to do anything which would greatly injure AA as a whole, nor ought it affiliate itself with anything or anybody else. There would be real danger should we commence to call some group wet, others dry, still others Republican or communists, and yet others Catholic or Protestant. The AA group would have to stick to its course or be hopelessly lost. Sobriety had to be its sole objective. In all other respects, there was perfect freedom of will and action. Every group had the right to be wrong.
Right. So when AA was still young, lots of eager groups were forming. In a town we'll call Middleton, a real crackerjack had started up. The townspeople were as hot as firecrackers about it. Stargazing, the elders dreamed of innovations. They figured the town needed a great big alcoholic centre, a kind of pilot plant AA groups could duplicate everywhere. Beginning on the ground floor, there would be a club. In the second story, they would sober up drunks and hand them currency for their back debts. The third deck would house an educational project, quite non-controversial, of course. In imagination, the gleaming centre was to go up several stories more, but 3 would do for a start. This would all take a lot of money, other people's money. Believe it or not, wealthy townsfolk bought the idea. There were, though, a few conservative dissenters among the alcoholics. They wrote to the foundation, AA's headquarters in New York, wanting to know about this sort of streamlining. They understood that the elders, just to nail things down good, were about to apply to the foundation for a charter. These few were disturbed and sceptical. Of course, there was a promoter in the deal, a super promoter. By his eloquence, he allayed all fears. Despite advice from the foundation that it could issue no charter, and that ventures which mixed an AA group with medication and education had come to sticky ends elsewhere. To make things safer, the promoter organized 3 corporations and became president of them all. Freshly painted, the new centre shone. The warmth of it all spread through the town. Soon things began to hum. To ensure foolproof, continuous operation, 61 rules and regulations were adopted. But alas, this bright scene was not long in darkening. Confusion replaced serenity. It was found that some drunks yearned for education, but doubted if they were alcoholics. The personality defects of others could be cured, maybe with a loan. Some were club-minded, but it was just a question of taking care of the lonely heart. Sometimes the swarming applicants would go for all 3 floors. Some would start at the top and come through to the bottom, becoming club members. Others started in the club, pitched a binge, were hospitalised, then graduated to education on the 3rd floor. It was a beehive of activity. All right, but unlike a beehive, it was confusion compounded. An AA group as such simply couldn't handle this sort of project. All too late, that was discovered. Then came the inevitable explosion, something like that day the boiler burst in Wombley's clapboard factory. A chill choke damp of fear and frustration fell over the group. And I perhaps just ought to read that bit there with the asterisk, Anthony. In 1954, the name of the Alcoholic Foundation Incorporated was changed to the General Service Board of Alcoholics Anonymous Incorporated, and the foundation office is now the General Service Office. Over to you.
Right. When that lifted, a wonderful thing had happened. The head promoter wrote the foundation office. He said he wished he'd paid some attention to AA experience. Then he did something else that was to become an AA classic. It all went on a little card about golf score size. The cover read Middleton Group #1, Rule #62. Once the card was unfolded, a single pungent sentence leapt to the eye. Don't take yourself too damn seriously. Thus was that under tradition 4, an AA group had exercised its right to be wrong. Moreover, it had performed a great service for Alcoholics Anonymous because it had been humbly willing to apply the lessons it learned. It had picked itself up with a laugh and gone on to better things. Even the chief architect, standing in the ruins of his dream, could laugh at himself. And that is the very acme of humility.
Beautiful. Shall we go back to the first page and see what we think about that?
Yeah, I'll kind of, while you're doing that, tradition 4 gives individual groups the freedom to vary their meetings, including where the meeting will be held, whether it's open or closed, how to begin and end meetings, for example, closing with a prayer or moment of silence, the program, content and topics discussed, and how to spend funds as needed. Limits to freedom. At the same time, it also cautions against straying too far from program's basic tenets. The autonomy provided in Tradition 4 does not mean an individual group has the authority to reword the 12 steps or traditions or to create its own literature. It also doesn't mean that groups should introduce, discuss, or sell outside literature at their meeting places. Many meetings have gotten away from the look and feel of AA's primary purpose by using non-conference approved literature, showing videos and popular self-help speakers, or allowing treatment professionals to speak at open meetings on the latest therapy techniques. There is a saying, and there is no right or wrong way to hold a meeting, but the group can cease carrying the message if it strays too far from its traditions and concepts. Go on, I'll hand over to you, Paul.
That's very good, Anthony. Very good. Yeah, so I was just mulling over the realities of this tradition and my personal experience over the years along these lines. I mean, I know of a 12-step meeting that voted to allow the use of literature from a different fellowship. Now, of course, you and I are chiefly involved in Cocaine Anonymous, which uses Alcoholics Anonymous, the book called The Big Book and the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions, which indeed we're reading from right now. So on that basis, you would think it would be completely fine to use the Fellowship Narcotic Anonymous literature, which I think is of great quality as well. All the literature is. But I know of a CA group that voted to allow the use of NA literature. And so that would raise the question, does that affect CA as a whole? You see, and of course, that group being autonomous decided it was quite all right to use that literature. And indeed, they do to this very day. I very rarely go because it's not a meeting that's on very often. And it also, I shan't, of course, mention the meeting, but it deals with specific, it's like a, what they call a special interest group, which brings me on to my next topic. I think I mentioned it to you last time we met, Anthony. I'm not the biggest fan of special interest 12-step meetings because, as far as I'm concerned, it goes against the third tradition that the only requirement for membership is a desire to stop using. And who can measure desire? In other words, anyone is welcome to be a member as long as they've got an interest in quitting or staying quit. And I think when you add in things like a policeman's AA meeting, or someone on their sexual preference type of meeting, or even on their gender, I just don't think, for me, in my opinion, as one member, that is what 12-step recovery is about. And I think it goes directly against the third tradition. So, firstly, the prime thing to understand about this particular one is the word autonomous, and it explains it there. It just means a group can do exactly as it pleases, but needs to bear in mind if it affects other groups or CA as a whole. So this tradition is very much tied in with the other tradition of non-affiliation, for example. We're not affiliated with YouTube or Skype or Zoom or in the rooms or WhatsApp in any way, shape or form, even though we have a voice on their platforms, for want of a better word. And I think it's really important to realize that each group does have the freedom. What you'll find in most 12-step meetings is that there's generally meeting etiquette in place, for example, and there's generally readings at the start and the finish of the meeting, and everyone usually gets one opportunity to share. But each group is autonomous. I mean, the meetings that I helped out with many years ago in this town, when we started a meeting, and there were 2-hour meetings. There were 2-hour meetings with a break for 10 minutes at 1 hour, and that worked very well. So, that's my initial thoughts. What's your thoughts, Anthony?
Yeah, I do believe that it's the group's been given autonomy. But it's been given autonomy to I believe, to adhere to, what's been put in place for the fellowship, whatever fellowship. I mean, but it is an autonomy. You do get, the autonomy to do a unity day. You got the autonomy to either have the meeting in a community centre, in a church, or whatever venue you're going to be using. You've got, the autonomy of making sure that, whatever type of tea, coffee, or whatever you're going to be doing at your thing. And I mean, some groups do, try to bring in literature and whatnot, and as you spoke about, and that's the group's decision to do that. But as long as it's not bringing any disrepute to the fellowship as a whole. But it says, as it says on here, it says, over the years, every conceivable deviation from our 12 steps and 12 traditions has been tried, because people wanted to make money out of this thing. People wanted to make, this is why these traditions had to be put in place. That was sure to be, since we are so largely a band of ego-driven individualists. So people come into recovery, their ego's been smashed, and then, they start going through the steps, things start coming back, and the ego starts reconstructing, right? So this is where this is where the ego, the traditions were put in place, the platforms, as you said. I like what you said. You keep people talking about platforms and forums and stuff. It's about the group, right? And we can use the Skype, we can use the Zoom, and there are other methods of online meetings as well. But as a whole, as long as the group are not bringing in, either AA, NA, or CA into disrepute, then there's nothing. I mean, the main primary purpose is it says, look, these very deviations created a vast process of trial and error, which under the grace of God has been brought to us to where we stand today. So, when AA traditions were first published in 1946, so they're guidelines, right? They're a guideline. That's what they are, traditions. And we are to become sure that an AA group, I mean, I've been part of groups where, a few people wanted to do stuff. There was going to be a unity day put on and stuff like that, and there was people throwing in ideas, and then obviously the group conscience had to talk, and decide what we were going to do. And it says, when AA traditions were first published in 1946, we had become sure that an AA group could stand almost any amount of battering. We saw that the group, exactly like the individual, must eventually conform to whatever tested principles would guarantee survival. Because this is really all about, these tested principles and the principles behind this. And it says, we had discovered that there was a perfect safety in the process of trial and error. So they had to trial and error it to start with. So confident of this, that we become the original statement of AA tradition carried this significant sentence: any 2 or 3 alcoholics gathered together for sobriety may call themselves an AA group, provided that as an AA group they have no other affiliation, meaning that we can't affiliate ourselves to, as you said as well, Paul, treatment centres, detox centres, day services. We go into them places, we visit in them places through PI and stuff like that, but we cannot affiliate ourselves to them places. Hospitals, psychiatric units, prisons. We can't affiliate ourselves, but we, in PI we go in. That's why these traditions were kind of put in place, because you might get, a group go in and someone approach the group and say, well, look, can we stand alongside you and do this, that, and the other? And it ain't down to the group to decide that. It's down to a decision gets made at World. So, this is why because otherwise it would be bringing the fellowship as a whole into disrepute. And and something went wrong, then it covers a stigma onto the fellowship as a whole. So there, these guidelines that we put here, especially this edition 4, the group's got autonomy to an extent, but they can't cross certain boundaries, because otherwise it just brings the whole thing into disrepute. Because you might get a couple of people in a group who say, oh yeah, we can as a group we can line up alongside this treatment centre. It's not just about, so we can't affiliate ourselves to anyone bar the fellowship, but we do have autonomy to, as I read, to do certain things, but not to affiliate ourselves to anybody else bar this fellowship.
So, a quick note as to just like the steps are in order, and when I'm working with others, Anthony, I'll very often give a brief recap, particularly if it's been a couple of days since we last spoke, before we start a new step. And indeed, while we're on one step, steps often have various parts to them. So, I'll often do a brief recap. So common welfare comes first. The personal recovery of the individual depends upon the CA unity or the AA or NA unity. The unity of the group is what promotes the personal well-being of the individual. And that unity of the group ought to be under the headship of God, under the sovereignty of God. Tradition 2, one supreme authority, a loving God as he may express himself in our group conscience. We're then able to be welcoming to anyone with a warm spiritual atmosphere conducive to recovery. And then we realize that we are autonomous as long as it doesn't affect other groups. And the thing is Anthony, it's really down to the group conscience, and particularly the elders, to use the wisdom to sort of guide the group and to try and encourage individuals to recognize the traditions. I mean, for example, here's another real-time, relatively recent example. We had one or two members that felt it was all right to change the steps. So they'd volunteer to do a reading where the steps were, and they would deliberately change some of the words and even stop whilst reading the steps to give their thoughts on that particular step. Now, nothing was said the first or second time, but ultimately the group has to arrive at a decision about that. You just can't have that. The steps are the steps. We've been using them in CA for 4 decades. Those are the steps. Similarly, we decided as a group that if you volunteer to do a reading, you're volunteering to do that reading. If you don't want to do that reading, then don't volunteer. You know, if you want to share about your perspective on the steps of the readings, you can do that when you're sharing, no problem. You know, so we decided, you know, I can't remember anyone specifically mentioning this tradition, but we just had the mature conscience, you know, being a well-established group with many members, that it's just simply not right to allow people the liberty to change the steps. You see, now had we allowed it, which we would not have done, had we allowed that, then that had the potential to affect CA and other groups as a whole, because people could come along and hear different sets of steps, go along to other meetings, say, "Oh no, I was in that other group and I heard them use a different set of steps." So you see, so that's an example of a group conscientiously being traditional. And let's remember as well that what pertains in 12-step recovery has been working very well since before you and I were born. You know, and there's probably over 30 million folks found lasting sobriety. And just before I hand it back to you for a minute or two, Anthony, I just want to do a quick half time. Again, if you're listening to this and you're wondering what the hell we're talking about, and you're struggling with drug addiction, please check out the other podcasts on this channel. In a few minutes, I'll be putting up some information about how to attend Zoom meetings. All you need is to download the free Zoom app and enter in the Zoom ID, which I'll be putting up on the screen in a few minutes. You can go to ca.org and get lots of information. I also want to say that this book we're reading from here is a book called The 12 Steps and 12 Traditions, and it has a number of pages on each of the steps and on each of the 12 traditions. And that book can be read or listened to completely free 24/7 at aa.org. aa.org. So that would be my suggestion: get yourself some literature and come along to a meeting. So over to you, Anthony.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And you know, this message cannot be watered down. Right, it's been set in these scrolls for a reason, and these things, guidelines, were put in place as these suggested ideals were put in place. And as you rightly said, you know, millions and millions and millions of people have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body by following these principles. You know, and if you look what it actually says about when they tried to make money and built that, built that centre, and what actually happened now, you know, and it just didn't work. It just didn't work because they were trying to mix materialism with spirituality, and it just weren't having it, you know. And I like what it says here. This meant, of course, that we have been given the courage to declare each AA group an individual entity, strictly reliant on its own conscience as a guide to action. In charting this enormous expanse of freedom, we found it necessary to post only 2 storm signals. A group will not do anything which would greatly injure AA as a whole, nor will it affiliate itself with anything or anybody else, nor would there would be real danger should we commence to call. So it's causing division, you know, some groups where others dry, still others Republican and Communist, and yet others Catholic and Protestant. The AA group would have to stick to its course or be hopelessly lost. Sobriety had to be its sole objective. In all other respects, there was perfect freedom of will and action. Every group had the right to be wrong. But I'm looking at the traditions checklist, and it says this. It says the first one: do I insist that there are only a few right ways of doing things in CA? 2, does my group always consider the welfare of the rest of CA. And as you rightly said, the old timers with the wisdom, right? Or nearby groups or loners in Alaska. So you got to think these loners in Alaska were using this Zoom before we were, right? You might have someone who's on, you might have someone who's there on work, or some, or someone who was born there, or internationalists miles from port. People on a boat. It could be anything, or a group in Rome or El Salvador. 3, do I put down other members' behaviours when it is different from mine, or do I learn from them? 4, do I always bear in mind that to those outsiders who know I'm in CA, I may to some extent represent our entire beloved fellowship? 5, am I willing to help newcomers to go to any lengths? Their lengths, not mine, to stay sober. 6, do I share my knowledge of AA tools with other members who may not have heard of them? Right, so these principles, these guidelines were put in place. And we can all become a band of ego-driven people with a million grandiose ideas, but we have to stick to this primary purpose and the guidelines. The group's been given autonomy, but only to an extent. There's still a precedent and a boundary there that needs to be kept. Do you know? And it was trial and error until they actually realised, these Roberts rules and the principles to adhere to keep a fellowship as a whole going. So the boundary and the principle is, do not affiliate with any outside enterprises. So it's about keeping this, to making sure our primary purpose, has been rightly suggested in the first 3 traditions and the traditions that are going to come after this as well. And in this tradition, our primary singleness of purpose is to make sure these groups are here, and the doors of the meeting or the login availability to get onto Zoom and get into a meeting is available for the person who's just come into recovery, or just fortunate enough to get back who might have had a bit of recovery, went back out there for a bit more research, and then fortunate enough to get back in, or the backslider or the drifter, for ego reconstruction. So it's very pertinent that we adhere to these stuff. I mean, and you do get people going, oh, well, traditions. I mean, rightly so, these traditions need to hold the 12-step fellowship in place, as well as the steps stop us from killing ourselves. These traditions stop us from killing each other. And in that respect, it might not be physically, it could be done psychologically as well. Do you know what I mean? And so we have to be very, very, very careful. And I do believe that people need to get insight into these, and cognizance into these traditions. So when you get into a group, you can exercise these traditions when need be, if anyone is trying to cross the boundary, and putting, the fellowship as a whole into disrepute or into danger. Over to you, Paul.
Absolutely. And, I mean, quite simply, every group is autonomous. The group decides what the group does, period. In my experience, Anthony, it's very infrequently that there's anything comes up that could possibly affect CA as a whole or other groups, but it does happen. So the rule of thumb is, it's only if something different comes up that you really need to think to yourself. I mean, if you've got a meeting where you've got readings at the beginning, sharing time, and readings at the end, then that is an ordinary meeting. You know what I mean? It's unlikely in that format that anything's going to crop up that's going to affect in any way, shape, or form AACA any as a whole or other groups. It's just not, right? So therefore, this tradition assures us of the independence of the group, the autonomy of the group, that the group runs the group. The people that buy the tea, the coffee, the biscuits, rent the room, get the literature and the key tags, the persons, the home group members run the group. That's it. However, if anything crops up that's going to affect potentially AACA as a whole, anywhere on the planet or other groups, that is where they've got to get together and enter into a prayerful group conscience and hear the voice, the supreme authority, the voice of God in the group conscience for guidance. And sometimes they've got to wind their necks in and and use wisdom. So what I want to do now, Anthony, I'm just going to mention these meetings, and then we can have a minute or two each, because that brings us to the end of today's broadcast. But I just want to say to our listeners, particularly anyone that's new to 12-step recovery, CA works very, very well. People find long-term sobriety. If you've got a problem with drugs, come along to our meetings and you can hear experience, strength, and hope. We've been talking about one of the traditions today, but if you're still struggling with drug addiction, it's the 12 steps that you need to get into, and working through these steps with a knowledgeable person that already has a home group, a knowledge of the literature, has been through this process themselves. We call that person a sponsor. A sponsor is someone that will altruistically take you through the 12 steps, so you can have your own spiritual experience and be liberated from the obsession to drink and drug yourselves to death. Now, we've got 3 broadcasts on this channel about sponsorship. What is sponsorship? Am I ready to become a sponsor, and how do I sponsor? So please check those out. There's lots of other broadcasts on here that many people find helpful. On this screen in front of you now, and bear in mind you can pause or rewind this broadcast at any time, there's lots and lots of meetings. If you look at the top left underneath the pink box, it says the Breakfast Club. That's on every morning. These are UK times, but anyone's welcome anywhere around the world. So that's on at 7:30 every morning. Great Gratitude every morning at 9:30. Pop-up Recovery every morning 10:30. At the top left, Weekend Recovery is on every day at 2 o'clock, and again every evening at 8 p.m. Over to the top right, Daily Reprieve every night 9:30. Reaching Out every night at 11. Tazana every night at midnight. So that's 8 meetings that are on every single day, and you're welcome at them all. So, please get connected, come along to a meeting. Similarly, there's 3 web addresses at the top of the page where there's lots of information. If you're in Britain, the long address in the middle at the top, you can get information about face-to-face meetings and online meetings. Never be put off thinking, if you come to a Zoom meeting, you've got to put your camera on. Only about a fifth of attendees put their camera on. You're absolutely under no obligation to put your camera on, nor are you under any obligation to even speak. Again, only a quarter or a fifth of attendees speak. Conversely, if you'd like to, you'd be welcome to share. But what you will hear is real people that have really recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body, that have lost the obsession to drink and drug themselves to death and have found a new way to live. And that new way is available to us all. We live to use, we use to live. But today we're free, and you can be free too. So please come along to a meeting. So I'm going to hand it back to you for a minute or two, Anthony. What's on your heart? What would you like to share with our listeners?
Yeah, it's been a great podcast. This is available to anybody. I was of the open variety, and I thank God, that these principles have stayed in place. And in Cocaine Anonymous, they've been there now for 40 years. And in AA, it's the 75th anniversary this year over here in the UK. In America, it's longer, but I just thank God that these principles have been adhered to, and this fellowship hasn't melted away, because we've had some staunch members who have adhered to these principles just to make sure that this message is being transmitted and transparent to be carried to the person who is still stuck down the pit of alcoholism or drug addiction or whatever type of addiction it may be. Because as we know off the back of the book, there's been a lot of fellowships come around, a lot of A's, and the 12 and 12 was wrote. It was published in 1953, which was 14 years after the big book was published. And it was they wanted to rewrite it, but it said, no, it's helped so many people. The 12 steps, 12 traditions, has helped so many people to recover from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. We can't change it. So I just want to encourage anybody, we're sport for choice now with Zoom. There's so many meetings we can get onto, you know, wherever you are on the globe. You know, there's so many meetings we can get to, and in your countries or in your areas or in your districts, you know, there's face-to-face meetings as well. So with Sport for Choice, this message has to be carried. It's our singleness of purpose, our primary purpose, to make sure people hear this message, to give them hope, to give them faith, and to give them courage. I'll leave it there.
Thanks so much, Anthony. Yeah, it's been a brilliant broadcast. Thanks so much for coming along, as always. Great to hear you. Yeah, so we'll be back with the recording soon, Tradition 5. Stay connected. Please reach out for help and support. There are other numbers on the screen there, and there's UK Samaritans at the bottom right. There's the CA London helpline centre bottom. There's the New York helpline underneath that. So, you know, there's lots of help available. So look, without further ado, thank you so much once again, Anthony. It's been brilliant hearing you. So yeah, until next time. Speak to you soon, Anthony.
Honor and a pleasure. Thank you.